Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we really try to cut through the noise and get straight to what matters from, well, stacks of information. Today, we're diving deep into something that's genuinely reshaped modern conflict: drones in the Ukraine war. You've shared some really fascinating sources with us. We've got CNA's analysis on commercial tech in combat. There's a critical piece from the Small Wars Journal looking at drones versus artillery. Really interesting Reddit thread on jamming issues, and even official Ukrainian military guidelines. So our mission today is to unpack the surprising facts, the stark realities, and what these unmanned systems really mean on the battlefield.
Indeed. It's a landscape that's changing, well, incredibly fast. And what's clear is that these technologies, which can seem quite simple on the surface, they've become absolutely central to military ops. We'll dig into how they're being used, some really innovative ways, and the huge challenges they create, for both attacking and defending. And ultimately, what does this all mean for military strategy going forward? How do nations need to think about this?
Okay, let's jump right into the sheer scale of this. It seems pretty obvious from our sources that Ukraine has become this, real-world lab, a high-stakes testing ground for using commercial UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles in war on a scale like nothing we've really seen before in modern times.
Yeah, and what's really interesting here is, well, the scale is definitely new. The idea itself, it isn't totally novel. Fane Greenwood's work reminds us that commercial drones, they actually have roots way back in the 1950s with hobbyists experimenting. And Ukraine was actually one of the first countries to use small commercial drones pretty extensively in conflict, starting back in 2014. Russia followed suit that same year. So this huge use we're seeing since 2022, it's really building on, almost a decade of quiet development.
The scale now is it's incredible. You see the Ukrainian government putting out calls for donations, actually recruiting civilian drone pilots.
Yeah.
And that's turned into what they're calling the Ukrainian drone army. And then on the other side, you've got Russia buying thousands of drones, especially from Iran, at this just astonishing rate.
The numbers are, frankly, staggering. One source we looked at from July 2025 said Ukraine is on track to produce over 2.5 million drones a year. 2.5 million.
Wow.
And think about this. Russia apparently launched over 5,000 Shahed-type drones in just 1 month. The highest number in a single night attack was supposedly 728. And the core insight here, I think, is that this volume, when the drones are cheap enough, it just completely changes the math for air defense. Your traditional, very expensive systems, like a Patriot missile, $3.3 million per shot.
Right.
It's just not economically sustainable against that kind of quantity.
Yeah.
It's a real strategic shift where, in many cases, quantity now just beats expensive quality.
Okay, so given this new reality, these swarms of cheap drones, what's it actually look like on the ground? How are they being used day to day? I mean, they're doing everything from ISR, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, to directing artillery fire, supporting troops in close combat. We even saw a comment from a former Russian general saying quadcopters are now essential for artillery missions, elevating artillery's role back to something like World War I levels.
That's a really key point. And it brings up a big question.
Right.
Are drones actually replacing traditional artillery? The Small Wars Journal piece argues pretty clearly that they're powerful additions, not really substitutes. So while SPD drones, that's first-person view, where the pilot sees through the drone's camera like they're flying it from inside.
Right, like a video game.
Exactly. While those are incredibly effective for, tactical precision, hitting specific targets, maybe armored vehicles or guys in trenches, they're largely being used, especially by Ukraine, to make up for shortages in artillery shells. They give you precision, maybe like a battalion mortar could. So localized fire support. But they don't have that wide area destructive power, that suppressive effect you get from heavy artillery barrages. It's more like surgical strikes, not area bombardment.
That distinction, addition versus substitute, that's really interesting. But you said especially on the Ukrainian side, they're compensating for shell shortages. So aren't they, acting as substitutes in a practical sense, even if that's not the official doctrine? How does that actually play out?
Well, it plays out very adaptively. I mean, the lack of shells forces a kind of tactical substitution.
Yeah.
So you end up using FPVs for targets that ideally you might want to hit with artillery if you had plenty of it, which leads to some incredibly creative tactics, for sure, but maybe sometimes less efficient uses of force compared to having the right tool for every job, if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Force adaptation. And speaking of specific types, what I found absolutely crucial, especially reading those Ukrainian military guidelines, were the details. You know about the individual drone types and what they do? Like the Iranian Shahed 136, the Jiran 2, as the Russians call it. That's a long-range kamikaze drone, right? A loitering munition.
That's right.
It has a huge range, up to 1,500 kilometers, carries a 40-kilogram warhead. And they're apparently really noisy. You can hear them up to 20 kilometers away. But they often use them in big swarms, like 6 or 8 at a time, usually at night, say between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. And they fly really low along highways or riverbeds, apparently to mask the sound with the background noise.
Exactly. Using the environment as cover. It's quite sophisticated tactically. Then you've got the Russian Lancet drones. These are smaller, more battlefield-focused loitering munitions, shorter range, maybe 40 to 60 kilometers. They're quieter. They use electric motors. And they're often used together with other recon drones like the Orlan 10 or maybe a Mahajer. The recon drone finds the target and can even act as a relay to guide the Lancet in.
Something else that really jumped out from the sources wasn't just the physical damage these things do. It was the psychological side.
Yeah.
Our sources are saying that just the presence of hundreds of drones all the time, the unique sounds they make, which soldiers learn to dread, and seeing all those videos on social media, it's driving a lot of fear and anxiety. It adds this whole other layer of mental stress beyond, traditional combat fears. Some even suggest you could use drones just for harassment, like non-lethal stuff, just to deny ground or keep the enemy constantly hiding. It's like a constant low-level terror.
That psychological piece is huge, absolutely.
Right.
And it feeds right into the tactical problem of how you actually deal with so many of them. Which brings us to that key question. Why aren't they just being jammed more effectively?
Yeah.
And the Reddit discussion we looked at really shed some light on how complicated this is. For one thing, jamming often jams your own communications and drone controls too. It's not selective.
Oh, yeah.
And maybe even more critical, switching on a powerful jammer is like sending up a flare. It tells the enemy exactly where you are.
Making you a target?
Making you a prime target for artillery, or even anti-radiation missiles, which are designed specifically to home in on things like jammers. So you add that to these huge front lines and these FPV drones that are incredibly fast and small. It's just really, really hard to spot them and zap them effectively with traditional EW.
So militaries have to adapt fast, like Ukraine developing these mobile fire groups, using just basic stuff, right? Small arms, machine guns, thermal sights, searchlights even.
Right, simple, available tools.
And initially they were getting, an amazing 95% shoot-down rate against those Shaheds.
Yeah, incredibly effective at first.
But then the Shaheds adapted their tactics, started flying higher and diving straight down.
Exactly. And that dropped the success rate down to, I think the source said 86%. Still good, but shows that constant evolution. It's a real cat-and-mouse game. And that pushed for even more innovation. Ukraine apparently started rapidly modifying its own ground attack FPV drones into interceptors, like the Sting drone. These are small, they're fast, and here's the key point. They cost maybe $1,000 to $5,000 each. So now you're reversing that cost problem we talked about earlier. It's suddenly way more expensive for Russia to send a Shahed, which costs maybe 20,000 to 50,000 drones.
Precisely. It flips the economics. One Russian official even confirmed, apparently, that Ukraine had downed over 500 Shaheds this way. He described it as creating an urban anti-drone dome. It's a really smart, cost-effective counter. And beyond shooting them down, those Ukrainian guidelines also talked about passive defense, right? Just making yourself a harder target. Things like designing defensive positions better, spreading out personnel and equipment, even using improvised stuff like sandbags or old car tires piled up to try and deflect the blast from a Shahed, given its typical 60-degree attack angle.
Yeah, basic field craft becoming critical again. And if you connect all this to the bigger picture, you see a challenge for, say, the U.S. military and others, which is adapting its own concepts, its own ways of operating much more quickly. Historically, maybe there's been a lot of focus on the offensive uses of drones, but perhaps less on developing really robust, affordable countermeasures for this new era of cheap, widespread drone threats. There's a clear lesson here, I think, about needing a balanced approach. Integrating this new drone tech, absolutely, but not throwing out the proven power of things like traditional artillery. It's about finding that right mix.
So yeah, what's started out looking like maybe just hobbyist stuff has truly fundamentally changed warfare. It's forcing militaries to adapt incredibly fast. The war in Ukraine really just shows us that while drones offer amazing new capabilities, they're just one part of this constant arms race, always pushing tactics, tech, and even the psychological burden of war.
And one more point, the sheer number of these things, especially the ones based on commercial tech, it really highlights some big gaps in current arms control thinking. Most arms control focuses on dedicated military systems. It suggests we probably need a much deeper look at how international rules or frameworks can even try to keep pace when innovation is happening so fast, often in the commercial sector. That's a huge challenge.
Well, our deep dive concludes for today. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of drones in modern combat. And here's something to think about. As these drone armies keep growing and the counter-drone tech keeps evolving, how might this whole dynamic push military strategy? Could we see a future needing fewer soldiers on the front line, replaced by more highly integrated, maybe even automated systems? And what are the bigger societal implications if we head down that path?